The story of the flood is not a story of water. It is a story of forgetting. And the moment you realize that, the entire narrative, from the first drop of rain to the dove's olive branch, reconfigures inside your mind. This is not a myth about divine punishment. It is the oldest, most precise map ever drawn of the psychological process that must occur before any genuine rebirth. This is where it changes everything. For thousands of years, we've been handed a surface-level reading, an angry God, a wicked world, a global reset. It's a story of external cataclysm, but that interpretation serves a very specific purpose. It keeps the power and the meaning outside of you. It makes the story about theology, about obedience and punishment, about a historical event you either believe in or you don't. The beneficiaries of that version are any system that wants you to look outward for salvation, to an authority, to a doctrine, rather than inward to the necessary chaos of your own transformation. Today we dismantle that. We go back to the original Hebrew text, not with religious eyes, but with the lens of depth psychology and neuroscience. And what we find is that the flood is not an event that happened to humanity. It is the event that happens within a human being when the old self must die for the new to be born. Your perception of this story, and more importantly, of your own cycles of collapse and renewal, will never be the same. Think about that for a second. The entire world drowned. Every thought, every habit, every structure of the old life submerged. This is the core image. But we've been staring at the water, not at what the water represents. The water is just the medium. The real story is the ark. And the ark is not a boat. It's a psychological container. And Noah is not a man. He is a state of consciousness. We've been reading a children's picture book when we were handed the blueprint of the psyche. Now stop for a second. If what you're hearing has started to shift something, if the idea that this ancient story is speaking directly to your internal process, not to ancient history, is landing, then stay. This is where that continues. This is where we pull the thread, and the entire tapestry unravels into a map you can use. The official version we have is a product of translation, tradition, and theological agenda. This is a documented process. The Hebrew text of Genesis is sparse, cryptic, almost algorithmic. It doesn't moralize like the interpretations that followed. It describes a process. But by the time the Greek Septuagint translators worked on it, and later the Latin Vulgate, and later the King James Committees, layers of doctrinal cement had been poured over the original architecture. The story was flattened into a simple fable of good and evil. Why? Because a story about an internal, universal human process of death and rebirth is uncontrollable. It puts the locus of salvation in the individual's psyche, but a story about an external God wiping out bad people, that requires an intermediary, that requires a church, that requires you to be afraid of the judgment out there, rather than understanding the necessary dissolution in here. That is the problem. We must become lexical forensic scientists. We start with the first clue, the one that cracks the case wide open. The name Noah. In English, it's just a name. In Hebrew, it's a root. Noach, Noha. It comes from the root NWCHA, NVHA, which means to rest, to settle, to come to rest. But it's not a passive rest. It's the rest that comes after immense labor, the settling of something turbulent. It is the still point. Now look at the verse right before God speaks to Noah about the ark, Genesis 5:29. Lamech, Noah's father, names him and says, "This one will comfort us concerning our work and the toil of our hands because of the ground which the Lord has cursed." Comfort. The Hebrew word is nacham, to naham. A different root, right? N-C-H-O-I-M. It means to comfort, to console, to sigh deeply. But here's the first seismic twist. In Hebrew, roots built around two core consonants are often part of a larger root family, where meaning vibrates across related sounds. The scholars Gesenius and Brown Driver Briggs point to a profound connection. The state of noach, rest, settling, is the psychological result of the process of nachem, deep comfort sighing. One is the destination, the other is the journey. Noah, the state of rest, is born out of a world that needs profound, sighing comfort from its curse, its toil. What is that toil? That curse? It's not a divine punishment on agriculture. It's the foundational curse of the conscious mind, self-awareness, separation, and the relentless, toiling effort of the ego to maintain its version of reality. The ground, Atma, is the substance of the human, the humus of your being. It is cursed to bring forth thorns and thistles, the persistent, painful thoughts and defensive patterns that grow without cultivation. Your mind, left to its own devices, toils. It produces anxiety, resentment, repetitive narratives. It cannot rest. Noah is the consciousness that can be called forth from within that toiling, cursed mental landscape. He is not a good man in a bad world. He is the potential for inner rest, activated within a psyche dominated by toil. This is the part nobody sees. God tells this rest consciousness to build an ark. The Hebrew word is teva, teba. It appears only one other time in the entire Hebrew Bible, for the basket that carried the baby Moses down the Nile. A teva is not a seafaring vessel. It's not a ship. It's a container, a sealed box, a protective casing. In both stories, the teva carries the seed of a new beginning, Noah, rest, and Moses, drawn out, i.e., the future liberator, through a destructive medium, water and the Nile's currents. The ark is not about navigation. It's about containment. This is critical. In the process of psychological dissolution, you cannot navigate. The old maps are useless. The old ego, the world that was, is being dissolved. All you can do is build a sealed container. What is that container? In Jungian terms, it is the vessel of the therapeutic process, the safe space of introspection, the disciplined practice of mindfulness or analysis that holds you while the floodwaters of the unconscious rise. In neuroscience, this is the function of the prefrontal cortex, the arc of executive function that must maintain a fragile stability while the limbic system, the emotional flood, rages. It's the therapy room, it's the journal, it's the meditation cushion. It's the commitment to hold a space of witness while the storm does its necessary work. The instructions for the ark are bizarrely specific. Gopher wood, pitched inside and out, 3 decks, a door in the side, a window finished to a cubit above. This isn't divine shipbuilding, it's symbolic architecture. Gopher wood is unknown, lost to time. It represents the unique, mysterious substance of your life, the specific experiences that form you. The pitch, kopher, is from the same root as atonement and covering. It is what makes the container watertight, sealed against the dissolving waters of chaos. It is self-compassion. It is radical acceptance. It is what allows you to be in the emotional flood without being completely identified with it. 3 decks, lower, middle, and upper. The ancient rabbis saw this as the tripartite structure of the human being: body, soul, and spirit. The Freudian id, ego, and superego. The unconscious, the conscious, and the transcendent function. The flood will impact all levels. The transformation is total. Now, the window. Hebrew, tzohar. Tzohar? It's not a normal window, shalom. It's often translated as an opening for light. Some traditions say it was a luminous stone, a skylight. It is finished to a cubit above. The light comes from the top down. This is the crucial detail. In the midst of dissolution, you must have a source of light that is not from the drowned world below. It is a connection to something above the floodwaters, not to God as an external being, but to the transcendent function of the psyche, to the self with a capital S, to the awareness that is not drowned by the contents of consciousness. It is the observer in meditation. It is the therapeutic alliance that reminds you this has meaning. Without this tzohar, sealed and directed upward, you are in utter darkness. The process becomes pure trauma, not transformation. And this is where it gets dangerous, because the flood itself. We read 40 days and 40 nights of rain and think of a weather event. But the Hebrew text describes 2 simultaneous sources of water. Genesis 7:11, "On in that day, all the glassy fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens guard were opened." The flood isn't just rain from above, it is a cataclysm from below and from above. The deep metehom is the same word used in Genesis 1:2 for the primordial, formless, chaotic waters over which the Spirit hovered. It is the undifferentiated, unconscious, the chaos of unprocessed trauma, memory, and instinct. The windows of heaven are the structures that usually hold back the waters above the firmament, a concept in the ancient cosmology. This is the influx of the numinous, the overwhelming power of transcendent insight, spiritual experience, or even psychosis, realities too vast for the ego to contain. Psychological rebirth requires both. It is not enough to have a breakdown from your repressed past, the great deep. That can just be a regression. And it is not enough to have a spiritual awakening from above. That can lead to inflation, to a spiritual ego. The flood, the complete dissolution, happens when both break loose at once, when your deepest, darkest material erupts at the same time. As a shattering, transcendent insight floods your awareness, the ego structure, the world you knew, cannot survive that. It is designed not to. The ark, your sealed container of conscious practice, is now adrift on this dual-sourced deluge. You are not in control. The text says God shut Noah in. The consciousness of rest, Noach, is sealed into its container. It is a passive phase. You endure, you wait, you trust the integrity of the vessel you built. The waters prevail, and all the high mountains under the whole heaven are covered. Every high thing, every peak achievement, every identity you were proud of, every mental structure that made you feel secure is submerged. It is the ultimate humility, the total death of the old persona. If this made sense instantly, if you're listening to this and recognizing a season of your life, a period of collapse where everything familiar was drowned, it's because you already knew. You've lived in the ark. You are the person this channel is for. This isn't about ancient history. It's about the architecture of your own transformation, and right now, you're seeing the blueprint. If this made sense instantly, it's because you already knew. Now the waters prevail for 150 days, a long, dark, formless time. Then Genesis 8:1, but God remembered Noah. This is not a memory lapse corrected. In Hebrew, zakar, to remember, is an active covenantal engagement. It means to intervene according to a prior promise. The consciousness of rest is re-engaged by the deeper pattern. And a wind, surwach, sweeps over the waters. The same word as spirit in Genesis 1:2, the same chaotic waters. But this time, the wind is not hovering to begin creation. It is moving to recreate, to separate the waters again, to begin the process of redifferentiation. The ark comes to rest on the mountains of Ararat. The waters recede. And this is the moment. This is the part nobody sees. Noah opens the window of the ark. He sends out a raven. It flies back and forth until the waters are dried up. Then he sends a dove. The dove finds no place to set its foot and returns. He waits 7 days, sends it again. It returns with a freshly plucked olive leaf. He waits another 7 days, sends it a third time. The dove does not return. We read this as a quaint story of bird reconnaissance. We miss the entire psychological operation. The raven is a bird of carrion. It is associated with death, with the unclean. It goes out and does not return. It is comfortable in the liminal, death-saturated space. This is the part of you that can first engage with the aftermath, the scout of despair, the cold assessment of total loss. It doesn't need a resting place yet. It feeds on what died. The dove is something else entirely, a symbol of peace, of the spirit. Its 3 flights map the stages of psychic reconstitution. First flight, no resting place. The new world is not yet habitable for this tender, peaceful consciousness. It must return to the ark, to the contained self. You try to find peace, but the inner landscape is still too flooded with the residues of the flood. Second flight, the olive leaf, a fragment of new life emerging from the dead wood. The olive tree is incredibly resilient, capable of sprouting new shoots from seemingly dead roots. The leaf is not fruit, it is promise. It is the first tangible evidence that life is possible again in this devastated world. The dove returns with it. Hope is now a physical object in your hand, but you are not yet ready to stay out there. third flight, no return. The dove finds its home in the new world. The peaceful, integrated consciousness can now live outside the protective ark. The process is complete. But Noah still doesn't leave the ark. God has to tell him to go out. Even when the land is dry, the impulse is to stay in the safety of the container that saved you. This is critical. The ark served its purpose. Now it becomes a prison if you don't leave it. The consciousness of rest must eventually become the consciousness of new beginning. But the text is meticulous. He doesn't just stumble out. He is commanded to go out from the ark, you and your wife, and your sons wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing, that they may swarm on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. The entire psychic ecosystem you preserved must now be released back into a renewed world. And then Noah builds an altar. His first act, he takes some of every clean animal and offers a burnt offering. The smoke rises. And Genesis 8:21, and when the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Stop. Rewind. This is where most translations create a catastrophic misreading. They have God smelling the barbecue and thinking, well, humans are just inherently evil little creatures, but this smell is nice, so I'll go easy on them. It turns the story into a capricious deity being appeased by a scent. It makes no psychological sense, and it's not what the Hebrew says. The key is the word lach, usually translated as for or because. I will never again curse the ground. Now lach. The intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. It can mean because, but in the syntactic structure, it can also be read as despite or although. The ancient rabbis debated this, but the psychological map is clear. The pleasing aroma is not a bribe. It is the evident seers of a transformed relationship. Noah, the consciousness that has passed through total dissolution and recreation, now voluntarily offers something back to the source. It is an act of recognition, of participation, not propitiation. The pleasing aroma is the scent of a conscious process completed. It is the psychic signal that a cycle of violence, the pattern of Cain of Lamech, of filling the earth with corruption and violence, has been internally resolved. And God's response is a covenant. A bow is set in the clouds, the rainbow. We've sentimentalized it. We've made it a symbol of generic promise. Look at the Hebrew. The word for bow is keshet. It is a weapon of war. It is now hung up in the sky, pointed away from the earth. The violence is disarmed. The tension of the bow, the tension between the divine and the human, between the conscious and unconscious, between the ideal and the real, is still there. But it is now a sign of remembrance, a reminder to God. The text says this, not to destroy. The cyclical, compulsive pattern of catastrophic dissolution is broken, not because humanity is perfect, but because the mechanism for internal transformation has been demonstrated. The ark exists. The map is now in the world. Think about what that means. The flood story is not about God losing his temper. It is about the psyche's own necessary, brutal, and ultimately merciful process of hitting the reset button when a certain density of corruption, of fragmented, violent, self-serving patterns, makes the current world unlivable. The promise of the rainbow is not that bad things won't happen. It is that the psyche itself will not initiate total, annihilating dissolution without also providing the ark of conscious witness. The container is built into the pattern. Now you see it. This is the moment you realize you're seeing something new. This isn't a Sunday school lesson. This is the operating manual for your darkest nights and most profound resets. If this is connecting, if you're recognizing the arcs and the floods in your own life, drop "I'm awake" in the comments. Tell me what city you're watching from. Let me see the geography of this awakening. We have the map. We have the pattern of dissolution and recreation. But a question remains, a dangerous one. If Noah is the consciousness of rest that survives the flood, what happened to everyone else? The corrupt ones, the ones who filled the earth with violence? Are they just evil? Are we to believe they deserved annihilation? This is where it gets dangerous, because the text is shockingly silent on the specifics of their evil. The earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. That's it. We project onto it. We imagine them as mustache-twirling villains. But what if their corruption was not cartoonish evil, but a specific psychological state? A state you and I can slip into and perhaps have lived in for years? The word for violence is chamas. It doesn't just mean physical brutality. In its root sense, it implies a violation of moral order, a ruthless seizing, a tearing of the fabric of a relationship. It is the psychic energy of exploitation, using another, or using the world, or using yourself as a mere object for consumption or ego gratification. It is consciousness devoid of empathy, devoid of recognition of the other as a living thou. It is the consciousness of pure appetite. And corruption, shachatas, means to be ruined, spoiled, decayed from within. It is not an external stain, but an internal rot. Put it together, a world filled with chamas is a psychic ecosystem where every impulse is to take, to consume, to use, where relationships are transactional, where inner life is commodified, where the sacred is rendered profane for a momentary advantage. It is a world without an ark, without a sealed container of interiority, of rest, of witness. It is a world of pure, frantic, externalized doing. That world cannot sustain itself. It becomes a feedback loop of trauma and re-traumatization. It becomes a psychic climate that is literally unbreathable. The flood in this reading is not a punishment inflicted from outside. It is the natural, inevitable collapse of a system that has severed its connection to its own depths and its own heights. It has blocked off the fountains of the great deep, repressed its shadow, and the windows of heaven denied the transcendent. It lives in a flat, two-dimensional parody of reality, and such a system must collapse. It is a law of psychology, as sure as gravity. The flood is that collapse. The everyone else is not an external population of bad people. It is every part of you that operates in that mode of chamas. Ruthless self-interest, psychic violence, inner corruption, those parts cannot survive the flood of reintegration. They are not sealed in the ark of conscious witness. They are identified with the flat, corrupt world, and when that world dissolves, they dissolve with it. This is the brutal mercy of the psyche. It will destroy a lesser pattern to save the possibility of a greater one. Have you ever felt a part of you die in a period of collapse? A way of being, a set of ambitions, a pattern of relationship that just could not make it through the flood. That was chamas. Being cleansed. That was the corrupt earth being covered. That is Noah's family inside you, the preserved clean pairs. The capacities for love, for patience, for creativity, for rest, sealed away from the frantic, violent outer world, waiting for the waters to recede so they can be set free on a new earth. We'll come back to this, because now we have to face the most controversial, the most psychologically potent part of the entire story. The moment after the covenant. The rainbow is in the sky. The new world begins. And Noah plants a vineyard. He drinks the wine. He becomes drunk. And he lies uncovered in his tent. His son Ham, the father of Canaan, sees his father's nakedness and tells his two brothers outside. Shem and Japheth take a garment, walk backward, and cover their father without looking. When Noah awakens and knows what his youngest son has done to him, he curses Canaan, Ham's son, and blesses Shem and Japheth. For centuries, this has been used to justify racial subjugation and all manner of perverse theologies. It is a moral and ethical nightmare in the surface reading. A father cursing his own grandson for a moment of disrespect? It makes no sense. It feels like a primitive tribal stain on a story of cosmic renewal. And that is the point. This is where it gets dangerous. Because if you read this as a literal historical event about a man and his sons, you will miss the entire psychological architecture. You will be trapped in the moral outrage. You will be arguing about the surface while the depth is screaming at you. This is not a story about a family feud. This is a map of what happens inside a human psyche after a cataclysm, after the floodwaters of a personal crisis recede, after you think the work is done. Noah, the consciousness that has endured the storm, plants a vineyard. The Hebrew word for vineyard is kerim, but its root, karam, carries the idea of something set apart, enclosed, cherished. He is cultivating the fruit of the earth, yes, but symbolically, he is cultivating the fruit of his own experience. The wine is the intoxicating product of that labor, the distillation of memory, of trauma, of survival. And he drinks. He becomes drunk. The Hebrew shaker means more than intoxication. It implies a staggering, a being overcome, a loss of situational awareness. The consciousness that navigated the flood is now overwhelmed by the very fruit of its own journey. It enters a state of vulnerable, unguarded exposure. He was uncovered within his tent. The tent, oh hell, is his dwelling, his personal private inner space. His nakedness, erwa, is his raw, unfiltered, unprocessed state. His shame, his trauma, his primal vulnerability. Now stop for a second. This is the moment after survival. You've been through the flood. You've made it to the other side. The world is new. And what do? You finally process what happened. You drink the wine of your own memory, and it overwhelms you. It leaves you exposed, raw, lying in the tent of your own mind. This is a non-negotiable stage of integration. The hero cannot stay heroic forever. The psyche must metabolize the storm. Now enter the three sons. They are not external people. They are three internal responses to this core vulnerability. Three ways your own mind handles the exposed, traumatized part of yourself. Ham, the youngest, sees his father's nakedness. The verb is ra'a. It means to see, to perceive, to look at. But in Hebrew thought, seeing is not passive. To see is to engage, to comprehend, and often to take possession of what is seen. He sees, and then he tells his two brothers outside. He broadcasts the vulnerability. He makes the private exposure a subject of external commentary. This is the psychological function of judgment, of internal gossip. It is the part of you that witnesses your own shame, your own raw state, and instead of holding it with care, it immediately narrativizes it. It turns your pain into a story to be told, even if only to other parts of yourself. It objectifies the wound. Shem and Japheth, however, take a garment. They walk backward. They cover their father without looking. This is the function of reverence and protection. The garment, simla, is a covering, a cloak of dignity. Walking backward is a refusal to gaze directly upon the nakedness. It is an act of deliberate, respectful blindness to the raw shame. It is the part of your consciousness that knows some things are too tender for direct scrutiny, that the healing of deep exposure is not through analysis, but through the compassionate restoration of dignity. You cover it, you allow it privacy to heal. Noah awakens. He knows what his youngest son has done. The knowing, yada, is intimate, experiential knowledge. The consciousness becomes aware of how it has been treated by its own internal functions, and it speaks a decree. It curses Canaan, the son of Ham, and blesses Shem and Japheth. Forget races, forget tribes. Canaan represents the fruit of the judgmental function. The cursed ground is the internal landscape that grows from the seed of shame broadcasting. It is a psyche that produces thorns and thistles, defensiveness, bitterness, a perpetual sense of being exposed and judged. It is the servant of servants to his brothers, the part of you forever in servitude to the critical, narrating mind. Shem and Japheth are blessed. The protective, reverent functions are elevated. They become the domains where the divine name, Shem literally means name, dwells, and where expansion, Japheth's blessing, can occur. Think about what this means. The entire arc of the flood narrative is the arc of a psyche undergoing profound transformation. The violent, chaotic world is the unintegrated mind. The arc is the conscious vessel you build through obedience to a deeper pattern. The flood is the necessary dissolution. The animals are the primal instincts, preserved in pairs. The mountain is the new level of awareness. The covenant is the new operating system. The rainbow is the reminder that total dissolution will not come again. The psyche now has a covenant with itself. And the drunkenness of Noah is the inevitable, vulnerable hangover of survival, the part where you are laid bare by your own story. Now look inside. Have you ever survived a great flood? A loss, a breakup, a failure, a period of chaos that wiped your world clean? And when you reached the other side, when you thought you were supposed to be the strong, renewed hero, did you instead find yourself overwhelmed by the wine of memory? Laid bare in the tent of your own solitude? That is Noah, inside you, right now. And when that happened, which son spoke loudest? Was it Ham? The voice that saw your nakedness and immediately started telling the story to every other part of you? Look at me. I'm a mess. I'm exposed. This is pathetic. Broadcasting the shame, or was it Shem and Japheth? The quieter, reverent functions that simply took a cloak of self-compassion and covered you without staring? That allowed you the dignity to heal without the harsh light of self-analysis. The curse and the blessing are not historical events. They are psychological laws. If you let the Ham function dominate, if you constantly gaze upon and narrate your own vulnerabilities, you curse the ground of your future being. You create an internal Canaan, a landscape of struggle. If you cultivate the Shem and Japheth functions, protective reverence, compassionate covering, you bless the ground. You create space for the divine name to dwell and for your consciousness to expand. This is where it changes everything. The flood story was never about God drowning a world. It was about your consciousness learning to navigate its own necessary drownings. The ark is the pattern you must follow to preserve what is essential. The covenant is the promise you make to yourself that you will not be destroyed by your own storms. And Noah's family is the internal counsel you carry with all its